I now give the floor to His Excellency Vladimir Makei, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Belarus.
President, ladies and gentlemen, exactly 2 decades ago, the United Nations and its leader received the Nobel Peace Prize. At the reception ceremony, former Secretary General Kofi Annan said that we're entering the 3rd millennium through gates of fire. Unfortunately, the fire has not been put out fully. We've already, for several decades now, seen protracted and unprecedented levels of global turbulence and unpredictability. This is a logical outcome of the fact that our planet is functioning, or has been functioning, outside the system of our systems and obligations enshrined in the universal principles of international law, UN Charter. Today, the world is being governed by economic egotism, political ambition, blackmail, imperial habits, crisis, conflicts, and orchestrated chaos. Some states attempt to impose sovereign states with artificial templates for social economic development, as well as barbarous policy of sanctions against undesirable governments, economic terrorism, and a return of the world to elements of bloc confrontation. This all has very little in common with the just and harmonious world order that people have been striving to build for so many decades. This is a clear sign of an obsessive, painful wish to stoke confrontation around the world. Blatant interference by the self-styled oracles in internal affairs of other sovereign states has already become the norm in international coalitions of nations. The negative trend in terms of global security is ever growing, and including through hybrid wars, malicious and criminal use of modern information technologies which fuel extremism and terrorism, as well as fake news. Today, with the help of electronic gadgets, you can undermine the domestic peace and harmony in any state and also remove its leadership from power. Moreover, for more than a year and a half now, the world is being held hostage to the COVID-19 pandemic. It has cost the lives of millions of people and caused irreversible social and economic losses and laid bare many negative global processes. We fully support the work underway at the WHO to strengthen it and to respond in how it responds to emergencies, health emergencies. At the same time, we would note the vital importance of not allowing these topics to be politicized, including studying the reasons for the origins of the coronavirus. In recent years, Belarus has always focused attention of the global community on the need for a new global dialogue on security. This is not only due, but long overdue. This format of discussion should solve the main problems, which are creating a new, well-functioning, truly just international order. We call on the global powers to start this kind of dialogue and acknowledge their own responsibility for the fate of the planet and carry out the civilizing mission incumbent upon them. It's also important to think about the economic components of the new order. Unfortunately, economic globalization is not working in the interests of all people around the planet. In this connection, we see great potential of regional integration processes for the global economy. We call this approach integration of integration. In May this year, Belarus, in partnership with Barbados and UNCTAD, carried out a high-level online meeting on the use of regional integration to achieve the SDGs. The leaders of the main regional economic organizations strongly supported the idea of strengthening this kind of interregional cooperation. 2021 is also an important date in Belarus's history and the history of brotherly states, 80 years since the start of the Great Patriotic War. The atrocities of Nazis cost millions of lives around the world. During the military ordeal, a third of Belarus's population died in the fight against the fascist invaders and their allies who waged genocide against our people. It is deeply regrettable that today we can see dangerous trends of skewing the moral and legal assessments of the outcomes of the Second World War, equating the rights of the victims and the slaughterers, of the liberators and the aggressors, and casting doubt on the outcomes of the Nuremberg trials. We consistently and decisively stand against any attempts to exonerate Nazis and justify their monstrous crimes. And this is why, this year in Belarus, we adopted a new law which provides for criminal accountability for the rehabilitation of Nazism, and also criminal accountability. There's also been a case on the genocide of the Belarusian people during the Great Patriotic War. As one of the founders of the UN, Belarus will try to address this issue on an international stage too, so that we all remember the main principles that led to the creation of our organisation. Indeed, some criminals, those who committed atrocities against the Belarusian people and who have blood on their hands, still are living peacefully in some neighbouring countries. Even sometimes they are honoured as heroes. Despite calls we hear every year at the UN to strengthen security, multilateralism, solidarity and mutual assistance, the world today is reaching an ever greater level of confrontation. Belarus has also been drawn against its will into the vortex of this geopolitical war. Our country, for more than a year, has been a target for belligerent pressure from the West. And only because Belarus did not manage to act out the highly polished script of yet another colour revolution to coincide with the presidential elections. Today, Belarus is subject of a large-scale hybrid war from all sides. We are surprised with the creativity of the authors who are using beautiful but hypocritical adjectives to justify their destructive action. These are measures to support democracy, sectoral restrictions and assistance to the well-being of our people and state sovereignty. However, the message is clear. The West has not been able to accept the choice of the majority of Belarusians because this choice of the Belarusian electorate spoilt the plans of some strategists. The blitzkrieg to change the government in Belarus didn't work. Moreover, the West quickly lost the support of the people with their protests organised from outside. It was a miscalculation. Belarus continues to develop successfully and carve its own path. Today, the Belarusian people are united in their choice of a strategic course for a strong, sovereign and prosperous state. And this is the focus of our inclusive constitutional reform, which is concluding in Belarus at the moment, and that brings all the population on board. In order to further demonise Belarus and to present it as a source of tension in the region and to also justify their own destructive action as regards our state, the West has fabricated a conflict with refugees on the western border of Belarus, forgetting about their own international obligations, both as regards our country, as regards the countries of origin of these refugees. Today, millions of refugees are trying to reach a full Europe from all over the world to escape from the hunger and disaster created by this same Europe and West as a whole in different countries and regions. But as it has turned out, no one wants them in Europe, and it's even gone as far as in Poland, a neighbour of Belarus, as well as in Baltic states, refugees are not only deliberately beaten up, but are being killed, and their corpses are being secretly, at night, being dragged across the border into Belarusian territory. And these aren't isolated cases, it's become a norm of conduct of our Western neighbours. Is this not the height of cynicism and heresy from those who champion human rights, who boast of the highest level of civilization, and who try to teach others how to live? The topic of refugees is really, once again, very relevant. This time, as a consequence of the irresponsible policy of the West, Afghanistan is a clear confirmation of this. And we should also not shirk the blame onto someone else, accusing Belarus of waging a hybrid war against the European Union, as irresponsibly leaders of Poland, Latvia, Lithuania and other countries lied about from this august rostrum. It is clear to anyone 10 million Belarusians objectively could not wage a hybrid war. They couldn't wage any war against the 500 million, 500 million members of the EU, even if we had the muscles of Arnold Schwarzenegger. From April this year, we propose the European Union to carry out a consultation on illegal migration, but we've not had a response yet. Moreover, in violation of previous agreements, the EU has stopped funding all projects pertaining to the fight against illegal migration. If the response to invitation to dialogue, the response is the iron curtain made of barbed wire, then it is clear that they are entirely at fault. We're always committed and will continue to be committed to a policy of good neighbourliness based on the old adage that neighbours are a gift from God. Belarus will always be committed to mutually beneficial cooperation with all states, even those who we disagree with. However, we will build our relations on the principles of respect and equality without blackmail and dictating conditions. Belarus has always been on the front line of the fight against trafficking persons, both nationally and internationally. This year, Belarus will submit to the UN General Assembly's third committee a broadly supported traditional resolution on improving coordination of efforts in the fight against trafficking in persons. This resolution is a key element in our collective international efforts, which should assist in creating stability around the world. We call on states to co-sponsor Belarus's resolution and to support it when we adopt it. We welcome the UN event in November this year of the on the fight against trafficking in persons. Ladies and gentlemen, we should not ignore another topic either, which we've always been sick and tired of discussing because of the speculation around it: human rights. It looks like it's a positive agenda for everyone, but today the human rights is not only a dangerous toy in the hands of a blundering and short-sighted politicians, but is a real weapon against undesirable and disobedient countries. Democracy carved from the dust of the West and imposed at the wrong time in different countries of the world has not come to any good. On the other hand, it has created chaos and instability. I mentioned Afghanistan earlier. It is a recent example of the senseless policy from some so-called champions of citadels of democracy. However, the consequence of this policy today is on the shoulders of the whole international community. Even a Democrat as the President of France, Macron, literally a month ago was forced to admit that it is not possible to impose democracy from outside, including through these weapons. Some attempts, as it is from so-called developed countries, to monopolize the copyright on democracy and arbitrarily define the level of democracy in other countries and, depending on that, stick offensive labels on sovereign states clearly reminds us of the methods of Nazis, who also divided the world into those who should rule and those who should be a slave. One other favourite toy of Western states is still unilateral restrictive measures. If we're looking at different processes in different countries, irresponsible politicians, because of some fantasy, are always ready to impose sanctions if there's something that they don't like. The futility of this policy is clear. Unilateral measures violate clearly international law and carry out serious damage to the whole system of international relations. They increase the potential for conflict and enmity in international relations. We express our solidarity with other countries who are suffering from sanctions, particularly brotherly people of Cuba, who for so many years have been suffering from unjust economic blockade because of the voluntarist will of one state. It is clear that the main victims of unilateral sanctions are normal people. Limitations on trade, on currency, on bank and transport sectors has a negative impact on the level of well-being of people and has a negative impact also on the development of private initiatives. It reduces the possibilities for education and threatens food security. Unilateral sectoral sanctions against big states of exporters of vitally important goods used in agriculture, for example, including minerals, does not only create a deficit of this valuable good on the international market and therefore because of the in prices, but it has a great threat to real people in vulnerable countries, mainly in Africa, Asia, and other areas of the world. We just need to hear from those representative of these countries speaking here at the General Assembly Hall. The world, around 1 billion people are starving in the world today because of the short-sighted work a pocket of states who apply unilateral economic sanctions against whole sectors of the economy. And without food, and hundreds of millions of people, more people could still be going out with food. The practice of arbitrary financial and economic sanctions, an instrument of political pressure, should be ruled out once and for all. And this should also be one of the areas that the UN works on. President, the United Nations should play a key role in addressing challenges and threats that are common to us all. At the same time, we are concerned about the fact that the UN is becoming a theatre for some states and a platform, but not a platform for joint action. The UN is commercializing its agenda and becoming more and more a mimic of Western policy. The UN is thinking more and more like the West, trampling on important principles of solidarity and multilateralism. If we think about the UN slogan, "Leave no one behind," Belarus believes it's vital to preserve consensus and listen to the views of every state. I'd also like to note one other worrying trend. Recently, behind the noble goal of assisting in increasing the effectiveness of the work of the UN General Assembly, we can see destructive actions of some states focusing on arbitrary interpretation and also reviewing the work and practices of this body. The deliberate work on the so-called promoting the voices of civil society at the General Assembly is no exception. We look at this, we see this as an attempt to give NGOs, who are often created and supported with the support of some interested states, to giving these NGOs a status that is identical to sovereign member states of the UN. This is categorically unacceptable. I'd like to also recall about the existence of a key principle of the UN work: one state, one vote. We are also against the degradation of sovereignty of UN member states and creating puppets dressed up as NGOs who would be able to drown out the views of independent states. A flooding of the UN system with views of NGOs would not only stop us from taking into account their voices, but it would make it harder to achieve consensus, which has become harder and harder every year at the General Assembly. Participation of civil society in the UN should be done on the basis of existing procedures. President, in one of his speeches, Martin Luther King said very wisely that is so relevant today, that we must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools. Today, the world needs solidarity more than ever, as well as mutual assistance and mobilization of collective efforts to overcome all of these disagreements. In order to not be fools and not to bring the world into chaos of another war, which would be the last in human history, we call on all to demonstrate wisdom. Wisdom and also the courage to move forward with our ambitions, to be able to justify the hopes that 76 years ago the delegates at San Francisco conference gave us, who wanted to build a system of stable and predictable international relations. I thank you.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Belarus for his statement.